This is a special Election Eve edition of Paul Murray Live.
G'day, good evening. Thank you, Rowan and the team, with another excellent episode of Outsiders back on Sunday. Australia, one more sleep. And for many, it won't be a particularly sleep-full night because you're nervous, you're excited. But finally, all of the hoopla, all of the predictions, all of the push, all of the media spin is done and gone. It's up to you. Now, I have said all the way through this campaign, and I maintain this, that nothing is inevitable. Remember that if the media, Twitter, were in charge of elections, Hillary would be president. Thankfully, that's not the law yet. You still have the say. You still have the final say. And while many elections can often be about giving a haircut to the government, or certainly based on personality, tonight Australia is at a fork in the road. We will know by this time tomorrow night whether we're going to choose the right path or the wrong path, in my opinion. Now, for those that are fresh to the show, this is an opinion show. Save your outrage for something else. My opinion is that the government should be returned. And I'll give you 10 reasons why I will certainly not be voting for the Labor Party tomorrow. They will not tell you who is going to pay to achieve the 45% emissions cut. They have had multiple opportunities, 3 different debates, an entire campaign, and all we get is the cost of doing nothing is more. You wouldn't buy a house from someone with that logic. You wouldn't buy a car. You wouldn't trust them to take care of your kids. Why give them that blank cheque? They will not tell you who is going to pay to build the infrastructure necessary for 50% renewable power. Now, I believe climate change is real and action needs to be taken, but it is already being taken. The chief scientist told the truth that Shorten and others will not admit to, that even if Australia did everything, win 120%, we do nothing when it comes to global emissions. So we will do our bit because we currently are. We're signed up and locked into Paris. But to get to 50% renewable energy, we are talking about tens of billions of dollars of stuff that has to be built. Wind farms that have to be built, solar that has to be built, and who will pay to build it? Is it going to be you, the customer, because the government makes them do it? Will it be you, the taxpayer, because we will help companies do it? The third reason I am well and truly not voting for Labor at this election. They won't tell you, if you're a low-paid worker, how much your pay rise should be. Bill Shorten started this election by saying that it was a referendum on wages. Well, referendums sometimes, yes, can be essentially yes-no questions, but they require detail. And there is no detail about what that pay rise should be. Instead, they have said they will meet with people, write a letter, advocate. They are not promising anything but arguing for a pay rise. Number 4, they won't tell you who is going to defend the borders. Now, Labor will tell you that this is a process question. But we know that Chris Bowen will be the Treasurer, Penny Wong will be the Foreign Affairs Minister, but who will be the Home Affairs Minister? Whose job will it be to defend the borders? They won't tell us. Why? They are going to increase the tax that you pay when you sell an investment property. They are going to drive down the value of your home because if there's fewer investors that are able to bid for your property, guess what happens? There's less demand at an auction. The price goes down. Now, that's fine if you're thinking, I don't have to sell my place for 10 years. We got numbers this week that a quarter of all people who have a mortgage in Australia right now are suffering from mortgage stress. That means a quarter of all people, if times get tough, will have to sell their house. They will have to sell their house potentially for less than the value of the mortgage. That's why I'm not going to vote Labor. They are going to increase taxes for those of you who have worked hard enough to be able to get to a place where you don't need welfare in your retirement. The changes that are coming when it comes to capital gains tax, when it is coming to franking credits, those things are about to change dramatically. Another reason, they are going to increase the tax on the people who already pay the most tax in the country. They are going to introduce not just the deficit levy, but essentially those who pay most tax in this country will be paying half. Number 9, it's going to cost more to employ anyone who already has a job. Let me explain. Shorten wants to promise that superannuation should move from 9 to 12%. That means if you're a public servant and you get your wage plus super, it's going to cost 3% more to employ you. If you're one of most people in Australia who get their super included in their overall wage, your take-home pay goes down by 3%. That's why I'm not going to vote Labor. And finally, they are going to have the Greens one heartbeat away from power. To get any piece of legislation passed in the Senate, they will need the Greens. The Greens who say that the media they disagree with is hateful and should be shut down. The Greens who believe in death duties. The Greens who believe in millionaires' tax. So if you're sitting in one of the many mansions in the apparently changing woke parts of Sydney and Melbourne, and you want to vote Green because of climate change, you're also voting one for death taxes. You're also voting one for a millionaire's tax. That means you pay. But more importantly, I do not want a country where the craziest political party in the spectrum is empowered. Not just to have direct access to a Prime Minister, but to be essential to him getting anything done. I could go on, and I will all night. Don't vote for the Labor Party. Can you know what you think at any time? Jump onto the Facebook page. Just go searching for Paul Murray Live. Great panel we've got this evening, including a lot of conversation has to be about the Senate. And I have to give a message to any of you who are thinking of voting minor party as a form of insurance at this election. Because if you do the thing that Labor is scared you might do, you can actually stop them winning power. Joining me to discuss so much this evening is Michael Kroger and Stephen Conroy, hosts, of course, of Conroy and Kroger, joining us now from Melbourne. Stephen, you'd agree with every one of those reasons and more, wouldn't you?
Well, I don't think I've got time to respond to
good point.
all
Michael
of
Kroger,
that,
what
Paul.
do you think?
Well, mate, I think you had 10 reasons and you're 10 out of 10. You're a triple A. I've got a few more to add to that, but no, you're pretty right. Shorten's got away with murder during this campaign.
Oh,
I mean, to not even be able to give an answer on what the cost of his climate change policy will be, and this wonderful political answer he gives, Paul, which is what's the cost of not acting? It's like, yeah, well, of course, but can you answer the first question? Like that bloke from Channel 10 tried to ask him. No one's been courageous enough to ask him that since. He's got away with murder, this fellow.
Now, also joining me here is Sherry Markson, the National Political Editor for the Daily Telegraph. Lovely to see you here, and of course part of the team here on Friday nights at Sky News. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, great to be here, and I think it's going to be so close tomorrow night, potentially minority either way. So I don't think it's kind of the landslide that everyone's predicting for Shorten at this point.
This is it. And a man who I will openly admit I stole the questions idea from, because he's done it every single day on your program. But I added a few more and I added a bit in. Chris Kenny, great to have you here, mate. I love that you're on in the middle of the day. I love that we get to see you in prime time as well. Lovely to see you, mate.
You're a good man. Good to see you.
All right, so before we get into everything else, before we get into the ups and downs, and Stephen, obviously I won't be cutting you off like that all night long, just a bit of fun at the start here. So we're going to get a lot in this hour. In this hour, we're going to get a news poll, the final news poll that'll be on the front page of tomorrow's Australian. Most likely will be released at about 9:30 Eastern time. So in about 20 minutes from now is when we'll have that for you. And we'll know whether it mirrors the most recent Essential poll that says things have got slightly better for the Labor Party. But I wanted to ask you this question, because obviously you're confident. Stephen, obviously the events of the past 24 hours have changed how some people are going to view this election and part of the emotion that is out in the field. But give me the raw data. Give me the data reason why tonight you're a whole lot more confident than you were 3 years ago and a whole lot happier than you were 6 years ago.
Look, I think for Morrison to be returned, I think the news poll earlier in the week described it best if you look through the data. And it said, look, it's too close to call. There are 17 seats that are too close to call, 15 or 17. And the truth was Morrison has to win almost all 15 of those 17 to hold power. Now, to be able to get every single one of those cards to fall right is a very, very long shot. The odds are very, very tough. So even despite news poll, what it might or might not say today, if it mirrors essential, I still can't see Bill ending up with less than about 78 seats. I think there's upside for us. I think we could be 80, 82, and the state of Queensland is probably the most problematic. No one really knows what's going on in Queensland. There are so many marginal seats in Queensland. If Labor just gets a 1 percentage point increase in its vote tomorrow, we could win anything up to 6 seats. But if it doesn't, it could lose Herbert and not win a seat. So it's a very, very tight election, and the final margin will depend on, I think, how things go in Queensland. But I think Bill can be confident that he is just in front at the moment.
Chris Kenny, months ago, no one would have said that a person of Stephen's eminence and sensibility would be talking about a 2-seat majority for the Labor Party. This started out as a woke revolution that was going to be into the 10s, the 15s, the 20s. We're now talking about potential best-case scenarios of a 2-seat majority. That's close.
I think Stephen's worried that his ambassadorship to the OECD in Paris is in jeopardy. No,
Come on, Bill. Get going.
To me, this is all predictable. You know, I'm not going to say I told you so, but I told you so. You know, back even after the Wentworth by-election, when they're all saying that the Libs are on the nose, it's going to be a Labor landslide inevitably. I always argued it would be close because the fundamentals are so good for the government. The government has repaired the budget. They have restored our border security. They are lowering taxes. And Labor's plan is, in normal circumstances, makes them unelectable. Massive amounts of new taxation, a huge punt on some climate policy we know will cost a bomb, but they won't say what it will cost, and we all know won't benefit the environment. So they made themselves almost unelectable with their program. What had played them into it is this Liberal disunity and Liberal chaos and Liberal sort of policy uncertainty in the preceding few years. But Scott Morrison has managed to channel the Liberals back to their central values and to highlight the contrast between the parties. And he's gaining on Shorten every hour, every day. And that continues right up until this moment. So to me, 6 o'clock tomorrow night can't come quick enough for Bill Shorten because he's gradually being run down as people wake up. But I do agree with Michael. This is John Anderson described it as the first post-truth election.
Absolutely.
There's been no scrutiny, no interrogation of Labor's policies. That is tragic, and I think in the end, the most likely outcome is a very narrow Labor win or minority government, but there is still hope for the coalition. I put a lot of faith in the shy Tory syndrome.
Yeah. Well, also, there's another factor in all of this, which is, of course, again, talking about the everything needing to go right. Shari, let's focus in on the area that you're very much focused on, the Daily Telegraph, about Sydney, about New South Wales. The assumption is that Wentworth is most likely to return. I know the bookies had a very different... I mean, it was very tight in Warringah, and then they blew that right out to say that Tony Abbott was virtually gone, trying to draw a direct line between the statement about Bob Hawke and how it ended up getting reported in the media. But I want to talk about places like Lindsay, because we got that marginal seat polling that showed that Labor was extending its lead in Macquarie. Now, I know Macquarie is a slightly different electorate. It's slightly more rural, goes up into the Blue Mountains, but it's the neighbouring electorate of Lindsay. Now, if the Liberals can't win Lindsay, then that is one of those must-wins to get in the game. What is your sense about Lindsay in 2019 versus 16?
I think that the Liberals and Labor, actually, both parties are expecting that the coalition will 100% win Lindsay. That is the expectation. You know, voters there have been so disappointed by Emma Hooser. And in terms of New South Wales, I think for the coalition at the moment, it's the second best state after Queensland. This is according to their polling and research, if you trust it. And, Wentworth is looking good for the Liberal Party. So is Lindsay. Gilmore's obviously very problematic. That is dicey, and we just don't know where that's going to go yet. Robert Oakeshott as well in Cowper is doing very well, and that could go independent. And,
I know, Chris.
Warringah...
No.
We've got Oakeshott coming back again. And Warringah, was looking like a definite loss even last week, and there seems to have been some improvement there, but we won't know till tomorrow night. So I think New South Wales is a good state for Scott Morrison. And, I think it is a lot closer than Conroy, although he's been heavily involved in the numbers. I think it's a lot closer than he suggests, and it's going to be very hard for either side to hit 80. It's very possible Scott Morrison could get 75 seats and then have to rely on, Wilkie or Sharkey or Katter to form government. That is one scenario that could unfold.
Now, Michael Kroger, when we get a chance to have a look at the news poll 15 minutes from now, clearly the greatest concern for Liberals is your home state of Victoria. And I was talking with some people a little bit earlier in the week who were trying to marry up the state-by-state polls that News Poll showed us about Victoria versus the picture that was there at the state election. In a second, we'll get into the ridiculous phenomena of people who live in mansions who want to vote for death taxes at the same time as climate change, but we'll get to this in a second here. What is the picture in Victoria? Is your assumption that where does it stand compared to that state election about whether it's better or worse? And particularly, and I'm asking 18 questions at once, but when you've seen those marginal seat polls that have come out, do they say that there's a haircut or a head chop coming for some Liberals in Victoria?
Well, that's only 5. What are the other 13? I'll do them all at once.
I'll work up to them. You get into it. Come on.
So things were going well in Victoria a year ago. The leadership challenge and change was not greeted well in Victoria because it was coupled with these allegations of bullying. And this was particularly pernicious in Victoria, where Julia Banks basically smeared all of the Victorian federal members from Victoria and, by implication, extension, sort of state members who were bullying her. And because no one was named, everyone was under suspicion. So from August onwards, the Victorian Liberal Party was seen as this male-dominated, aggressive, rude, bullying group of people who've attacked nice people like Julia Banks. And that pernicious abuse permeated the party more here than anywhere else because Banks was from Victoria and a very prominent member. She'd won the only seat from Labor at the 2016 election, as you know. So that killed our chances, quite frankly, in the state election. No one wanted to know the Liberal Party in November. They didn't want to know the Liberal Party the month before in Wentworth or in the Wagga Wagga by-election in September, where Gladys Berejiklian had a 22% swing against, and then 19% in Wentworth and 5% here. What's happened since November, to answer your third question, is that things have slowly improved. As people have seen Morrison getting better, they've had less concerns about Malcolm going. But still, there's an undercurrent of these bullying allegations which have never been explained by Banks, and the media have never cross-examined her on it sufficiently, and she's got away with murder. So we're recovering still from this view of the Victorian Party that it's this group of male bullies who threaten Julia Banks. What does that mean in terms of individual seats? Well, as you know, Dunkley and Corangamite are Labor seats, and they're included already in the National Labor 72. If anyone deserves to win, it's Sarah Henderson, who's been utterly magnificent campaigning in Corangamite, and if she wins, she will get a knighthood. Prince Philip, and then she'll be next. And Chris Cruther's done a great job down there, but the union's been running a campaign against him for 3 years. So it's hard in those 2 seats. I'd love those 2 to win. They're good friends of mine, obviously, and I'd love them to win, but they're hard. Chisholm, of course, is difficult also because you've had the member resigning, smearing the whole party, and basically, as you're seeing in Lindsay, where the member has gone out in a bit of a huff or there's been a problem with the member, the electorate don't seem to like that. So that's why Chisholm, even though it's only 2.9%, is also hard. That's one net loss, effectively. So you then go to Indi, which I think the party will win back. The Liberal Party's got a sneaky chance of taking Mallee, but that's from the National Party, so we consider that a draw. The real battlegrounds are in seats like Deakin, Latrobe, Aston, Casey. I think Michael Sukkar will win in Deakin. He's one of the best local members in the country. Alan Tudge has done a stunning job. Jason Wood never knocks up getting grants for his electorate. He's the grants king. There's not an organisation in Latrobe that hasn't got a grant through Jason Wood, and he's responsible for half the national debt himself. I think Jason Wood will win, and I think Tony Smith will win. So you've then got Julie Banks. You've got Julie Banks down there, and she's created mayhem. Fancy running against Greg Hunt. If I can bother you for 1 minute, tell you a story about this fellow Greg Hunt, who is not only the best health minister, but the attempt to attack Greg Hunt is disgusting. I have a friend dying of melanoma, and I had to send a text to Greg Hunt last night to try and find out when a particular drug was going to be put on the PBS for my friend 2 nights before the election. I said, sorry, Greg, to raise this with you, blah, blah, blah. 7 minutes later, Hunt rang me. This is 2 nights before the election. I spoke to Greg for 30 minutes last night because he's got nothing else to do. Gave me all the information they needed, which I then passed on to my terminally ill friend. Hunt is a superb human being, an outstanding Australian. If you are a swinging voter down in Flinders, do not, under any circumstances, vote for Julia Banks. Probably the most treacherous Liberal in the history of the party. What we did for her and what she's done for us. So Flinders, Greg Hunt should win. So all in all, hard to hold Corangamite and Dunkley because we need a swing to us. Hard to win Chisholm because the local member's gone, and I'm hoping all the others hold. There may be one loss amongst the others, but hopefully we'll hold all of those, Paul.
Thank you, mate. Good answer to 16 questions. I'll come up with others in a second. Now, there's some breaking news here, some developing news, and it is concerning, which is police have confirmed to Sky News that police say that there has been an attempted stabbing at a Balgowlah Heights public school, at the Balgowlah Heights public school tonight, which will be a polling place tomorrow. Police are currently on the scene. The man is reported to have minor injuries. There are no details at this stage, but we are working on it, and we are working at whether it is the victim is someone clearly associated with the preparations for a polling booth tomorrow. That clearly is an area in the seat of Warringah. When we know more, we'll pass it on to you. Let's pause for our regular panel here, and something I'm going to do all in this first hour, it's a panel palooza this evening, is have a chat to the people who are going to really matter, not just tomorrow, but in the years going forward, because how the Senate works is a big part of this picture. Pauline Hanson is the leader of One Nation, and she joins us now from Newcastle in New South Wales. Senator Hanson, good evening, and how are you feeling about Malcolm Roberts being able to join you for a second time out of Queensland?
Look, we're getting good feedback in Queensland, as a matter of fact, right across the state. So there appears to be a lot of support. I'm, feeling quite confident with Malcolm, but it's still, it really comes down to tomorrow, Paul. Make sure he gets over the line. So we need every vote we can get in Queensland and all the other states for our Senate candidates.
Now, part of the mathematical calculation of how the Labor Party can get to this potential two-seat majority is that One Nation voters, many of them will eventually give their vote back to the Labor Party. Now, I know that preferences and a discussion about where to put One Nation was troublesome during the election, but as the leader of One Nation, what is your direct appeal to the people who are going to vote for One Nation in the lower house tomorrow about what they need to do with the priority of going to Liberal or Labor once they get to number 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6?
What we've done in the National Party seats, we're flying preferences to the National Party before the Labor Party. In the coalition-held seats, we've got a split ticket. So we're saying to the voters out there, you decide where your preferences want to go. I'd be the only member of Parliament, or political party, I should say, that has tried to educate the people that they own their preferences, not the political parties. And our how to vote cards are only a recommendation. So what I've tried to inform the people is, you put your vote to One Nation number 1 and then flow your preferences where you want them to go. And people don't understand the preference system and how it works, but I'm trying to say you are in control of your vote. You decide where you want your vote to go, and who do you think will best represent you on the policies and the direction of the country.
As a party machine, one of the difficulties for a minor party is to have enough people at enough polling places to hand those things out tomorrow. 3 years ago, you were able to win many seats across the country. How many extra workers will you have around the country tomorrow with the One Nation T-shirts? Has it been an improvement in the number that you had last time?
Oh, most definitely, Paul. Last time we won 4 Senate seats, it was a double dissolution, but we only stood a handful of seats around the country. This time we've got over 70 candidates that are standing, lower house seats and the Senate. So it's a far better result that we have. It's more people on the ground, more booth workers, a far better run campaign this time. And of course, my being on the floor of Parliament for the last 3 years and getting things happening has been very instrumental to the support One Nation has gathered, like things that I've done in getting the family law court, getting that on the move. We've been talking about water in Australia, you know, reducing the electricity costs, but another thing too is we were instrumental in the Bank Royal Commission and the Senate inquiry that we held, and that was chaired by Malcolm Roberts. There's a lot that we have done, so people know that I'm prepared to get up there and speak about the issues that they're all thinking about, but the other politicians just sweep under the carpet and don't speak about it.
All right, Pauline, we're only going to do a couple of minutes with everyone. Thank you for all your time during the campaign. Best of luck to your team tomorrow. If people want to learn more about their local One Nation candidate or how to vote, what's the website? What's the information?
Go to onenation.org.au, have a look at our candidates, and if you can give One Nation your vote, because, Paul, you said it is people's insurance in that Senate, and it certainly is. They're political parties, and, of course, Michael Kroger will say that they did everything for Julia Banks, now Julia Banks has turned on them. Well, let me say that I've done everything to support the government and their legislation, 15% backpacker tax, the ABCC bill, plus other things, and the corporate tax cuts, and they've turned on me, and especially in the city of Latrobe, Jason Wood, they've actually preferenced the Labor and the Greens before One Nation. So go figure. They two-party system, that's all they want. They don't want anyone else in there, and I'm there to question them, bring accountability to that Parliament, and it's very important for One Nation to be on the floor of Parliament.
All right. Thank you, Senator. Do appreciate it. All the best to you and your candidates on the weekend. Paul. And up there tomorrow. We'll look forward to seeing you because you're in the Senate for another 3 years. Sorry, lefties, she ain't going anywhere. More from Paul Murray live in a second here on Sky News the night before. It's time to choose. Thank you very much for watching. Now, something that we need to talk about that is going to be massive after this election. We don't spend enough time talking about it because the horse race is always more exciting. The Senate. Now, if Labor does achieve its 2 or more seat majority tomorrow, as the polls are leaning towards, they need to get things through the Senate. Obviously, the Greens would vote for them, but even the Australia Institute, which is a lefty think tank, suggests that they will need at least 2, maybe 3 votes in the Senate to actually get any of their legislation passed. Now, what is interesting about this is that basically there is a huge swathe of minor parties who are saying no to the franking credits changes, no to the negative gearing changes, and no to capital gains. Let me run you through it. One Nation, no to all 3. Centre Alliance, negotiable, which would of course mean they need 1 more. Australian Conservatives, no to all 3. And Palmer, no to all 3. Stephen Conroy, the difficulty for a Labor government, should it be a Labor government, and it's a deeper conversation that we have over the next few weeks, should that be the way that it goes, is we have seen a Senate that will pass all the spending measures. We still pay compensation for a carbon tax that doesn't exist anymore, but we see a Senate that will always knock back revenue or spending cuts. That means the budget deficit is immediately in play for Labor. How is Labor going to square that circle if they're the government?
Well, look, I think my best analysis for Labor and the Greens' combined Senate position would be 36 or 37. So they need 39 to pass legislation, so they probably need at least 3 votes from the rest of the crossbenches. Centre Alliance have 2 at the moment, possibly 3, depending on the result. They've got strong views, but they're also relatively pragmatic. And one of the things that Nick Xenophon always was pragmatic. And I think their senators are of that same approach. Darren Hinch might be returned in Victoria. He's not an ideologue opposed to Labor. And then you have possibly Jackie Lambie in Tasmania. And I worked well with Jackie previously. She's a pragmatist at the end of the day. She's passionate about key issues, but she's not an ideologue, on the right. Then you have Corey, who probably, and
he's not going to touch any of these.
Probably isn't.
He's going to be on the show later, and I'll tell you what he's going to say.
I said I'm not speaking for him. I said I suspect he's probably unlikely to vote for this. But it's hard to make the sort of bald assumption that you're making that we can't pass anything yet.
No, I'm not suggesting that, but I'm saying if the people are saying what they are saying before the election and then they go in and they are either elected or re-elected or are in a position of power, the Centre Alliance are saying things like grandfathering when it comes to capital gain, when it comes to the franking credits changes. These are billions of dollars of changes that are going to affect the budget. And I want to bring in Darren Hinch now, who is, of course, running for re-election in the state of Victoria. He's a long-time friend of the show. Where you been, brother? Come on.
You guys moved too far right for me at some stages. Now, listen, two quick things.
Hang on, you're going to come on the air and spit in my eye?
Yeah, that's all right, son. Listen, Stephen Conroy had put a very good point, and he said, I'm a pragmatist, and that's why...
That's outrageous, Darren.
No, that's why I am on the Labor how to vote card, the Greens how to vote card, the Liberal how to vote card, because I am a pragmatist, I'm a centrist, except on law and order, where I am right-wing, OK? I can deal with any government, whether it be the coalition re-elected. I believe it'll be a Labor government elected tomorrow, and I can work with them, I will work with them, and I'm looking forward to it if I get re-elected.
So where are you on franking credits, on negative gearing and on capital gains?
OK, all three. On franking, I've covered 9,000 kilometres around Victoria in the past few weeks campaigning in the Justice Bus, and franking is on the nose. It doesn't matter if you think it's legally right or morally right or whatever. You can't take money away from people that they've already had. I mean, there are people there in their 70s, 80s and 90s who are self-funded retirees. They can't go back to work at age 80. They have budgeted that money, and taking it away from them, it's very unpopular. So I don't think that's one's going to get through. On negative gearing, I was totally opposed to changes to negative gearing when I got elected 3 years ago. I now have got there and realised there are politicians who have 30, 40 and 50 negatively geared properties. That's what was not designed for. I have one negatively geared property, and I use it. I rent it. I think if they can come back with something that says 2 or 3, I could go along with that. On franking, if they can find a way to cap it, there's room to move there. The capital gains tax, they're going to have problems there because the Labor Party image, and ScoMo's done this very well, is tax, increase the taxes. The whole thing about the election, about 2 weeks ago, well, 5 months ago in Canberra, they're saying we're going to win by 20 seats, 30 seats, 40 seats. I took a bet with one of my staff about 10 days ago and said 10 to 14 seats. Last Monday I said maybe 6 to 8 seats. It's coming down, so it proves it's getting tighter and tighter. I still think it will be a Labor victory, and I think the Bob Hawke factor will actually play quite large. 2 reasons. I think Tony Abbott has absolutely done a disgraceful thing with his comments about in his press release about Bob Hawke. I watched it last night. I thought, how can you do that? Number one. Number two, I think there'll be like a chance that Bob Hawke will win his 5th election this weekend. And I think there'll be a win one for the Gipper, win one for Bob. I think that will influence people quite a lot to some. And where I think it'll hurt the government is they've been campaigning saying Labor can't handle your money, Labor can't handle your money. But because of the death of Bob Hawke last night, people think, well, back in the days of Hawke and Keating, they didn't do a bad job. So I think that will hurt the current government.
I don't disagree. I mean, we are talking, about 25 years ago when it comes to that. There have been more recent examples when Bill Shorten was around the cabinet table. But I wanted to ask you about your chances. I hope you get re-elected. Despite how you opened it, I've always been a supporter of yours. I'd like to... I wish you nothing but the best. Give me an idea about how mathematically it works. Last time, it was a half Senate... it was double dissolution, which meant the bar was lower. How are you
Easy.
going to get to a position to be able to have enough raw votes to then get the Labor preferences and those others you've talked about? What do we get to see tomorrow night?
Okay, I think we've got about a 65% chance of being re-elected. Our slogan was, on the side of my bus, sick of them, vote for us, unfinished business. And we have finished some business. I've promised what I promised. We've got the passport ban on convicted sex offenders going overseas. We got that through. I pushed for ratios in nursing homes for nurses and aged carers. I put it up in the Senate. Labor voted against it, Libs voted against it, Nationals voted against it, Greens voted against it. They all voted against me. Now they're all saying, oh, we must do something. And travelling around the countryside, because I suspect the Royal Commission into Aged Care, which we pushed for, is now having public hearings, and I think that is focusing people's attention on it. I mean, I've said this before, Paul, it is a disgrace. The last time I was in jail, okay, the average spend on food in aged care is $6.07 a day. When I was in jail, it was more than $9 a day, and all the free milk. I was sharing a cell block with a bloke who's on the phone to his wife saying, I'm making some Greek yoghurt. And she said, how much milk do you use? He said, 9 litres. She said, I can't afford $30 for milk. And that's when people are eating better in jail than pensioners are at home and in nursing homes, that is wrong. That's why I'll be pushing for 2 things. More money for pensioners. I supported the Greens on one thing, and that was the $75 increase per fortnight for New Start. I'm backing that as well. And I hope that I've heard you on television in recent days. I still watch you. I've heard you.
I know, you text me most nights. Let's not pretend you sit there throwing bombs at it. Come on. All right, finally, how do people learn more about the Justice Party? Just go to the website, or just go to the Justice Party Facebook page. They know who I am. They know what I stand for. They know what I've done. They like me or don't like me. Vote for me or don't vote for me. If you want to support the Justice Party, put Hinch 1 above the line for the Senate. Vote for whoever you want. The government you want, you vote for it. That's fine by me. Just give me your first vote above the line. The other thing is, I think a quick one. I think Clive Palmer's going to do not as well as people think he will. In Victoria, he's on the nose. If Dutton had run as PM, the Libs will be even more on the nose. I think you're going to find that I think that Palmer will probably knock off Malcolm Roberts in Queensland. What a bloody choice that is. All right, we're done, mate. We're done. If you want to just hang around for longer, you can. See you later. Thank you very much, Darren Hinch. He may not be to his political taste, but he knows ratings, apparently, which means turn up the night before election, because there's an awful lot of people watching here in prime time. Yeah,
and if you're right-wing, don't vote for Darren Hinch, according to that.
What about this Senate picture where, there's a lot of things that are there to be predicted, but let's talk about that, because if things are to be negotiated, and Centre Alliance are the ones who are the ones doing the negotiating, or that there's anything to be negotiated here. These are multi-billion-dollar holes that are the difference between what is being put to the election and what can be negotiated to get through the Senate. I know we are a couple of steps ahead of ourselves, but that's why the election matters, because you can't vote for Labor on the assumption they can deliver their whole picture when the actual chamber that will decide whether they can or can't will deny them the money that it costs to actually deliver the spending.
Well, I know you're a big minor parties man for that reason, a check on the major parties.
I support a bloke who just insulted me on the air.
I prefer the major parties, and you heard that from Darren Hinch. Yeah, he doesn't like right-wing, so don't vote for him if you're right-wing. He's also, like most of these minor parties and independents, he's all for spending more money for pensioners and wherever else, but he doesn't like efforts to raise money. So they're all care and no responsibility. And I'm going to be consistent here. You know, I'm not a believer in Senate obstruction. And Labor have been very clear with their policies in the lead up to this election. And they deserve to implement them. If they want to go to the people with a whole bunch of tax increases, well, then let the Senate pass them and let us pay those taxes, and then let the people set it right at the next election.
The problem is Labor has promised a return to surplus faster and a bigger surplus, but it's doing that because it's going to, through legislation, through the Senate, repeal the tax cuts that have already been
legislated. Mics are open, guys, in Melbourne.
Repeal the tax cuts
Mics are open in Melbourne, guys.
Already been legislated. And that is clearly not going to happen. That is not going to get through the Senate. So there is no way that Labor will be able to deliver the surpluses that they're promising. That is just, you know, it makes that their mini forecast, their costings, almost a fictional document. There is no way that Senate will vote to repeal tax cuts.
No, you're right. You're getting ahead, but you're right, and that's exactly what Paul was saying. I mean, I'm talking about the ideal world. I'd like to see it happen. but they will be frustrated and they'll have to bargain and haggle, and at the very least, some of it will be wound back, and they'll be in trouble straight away. Yeah.
Well, and it's that picture that I think Michael Kroger matters. But look, we are getting into the granular detail. There's plenty more feels and the rest of it that are going to be around. Now, I've heard a little rumour, so if it's not true, I apologise to float one on television. But apparently what your old mates in the union movement in Victoria are planning for tomorrow, inflatable Peter Duttons that are going to be at an awful lot of polling places. And Kelly O'Dwyer's comment about the worst of the Liberal Party is on posters all over the shop. That's the closing message that the unions will be bringing to polling places tomorrow in Melbourne. Obviously, you'll disagree with that, but I wanted to ask you just about the political science of this. The stuff people see at a polling booth tomorrow, the last-minute bunting that's there saying, you know, the bill we can't afford, or the change that we need, or the don't trust because this happened or that happened, or, again, the inflatable of a member from another state. Does that ever actually impact people? Because there is a certain number of people who apparently don't make the decision until they're in the queue.
Look, the answer is who knows what impacts those 15% or so. Some say it's 5%, some say it's 20%, but roughly you think 15% make up their mind on the day. Who knows what impacts them as they walk in? It could be any of those things. It could be any of those things. It could be a comment from a friend in the car on the way to the polling booth. The truth of the matter is that we don't know what impacts people at the last minute. It's probably more likely to be a discussion with somebody than a poster at the polling booth. It could be a smile or a friendly face at the polling booth.
It's your charm as you hand them the how to vote card, Michael.
It could be my charm, Stephen, yes, or your charm. It could be any of those things. In the end, everyone has a different reason for making up their mind at the last minute. We'll never know what they are. But as I said, it's more likely to be some kind of personal contact rather than a blow-up dole. If that's the level of sophistication the trade union have got to, well, for goodness sake.
Look,
for goodness sake.
Could I say, Michael and I have discussed the effect of advertising in election campaigns for a while, and what I think Michael's dead right on, and I absolutely agree with him on, is a message that isn't focused on something that already exists. You can't create a new message on one day. It has to resonate and be relevant to a perception. I think the inflatable Peter Dutton, I think, not my cup of tea. I think the Kelly O'Dwyer message, and Michael, you'll remember, has already raised it. I think the Kelly O'Dwyer statement about how the Liberal Party looked to be homophobic, climate deniers, and I can't quite remember the full trifecta, but, you know, bordering on racist. I think that was a very powerful statement, not from Julia Banks, but from a sitting cabinet minister, female cabinet minister, anti-women, I think it was.
From the Prime Minister's perspective, that has been one of the biggest betrayals, Kelly O'Dwyer, and that seat, if it is lost for the coalition, that will be, you know, a huge problem, because if she'd run, they'd have obviously a much better chance of holding on to it. And so, you know, you can understand, or he can understand, Julia Banks's defection, but Kelly O'Dwyer is a huge betrayal.
I agree spectacularly. I also don't think it's a particular loss for the government, but that's just me. All right, we're going to take a break, and then we do expect news poll, which is due any moment now, the final news poll, which is a pretty good indicator about what is going to happen tomorrow. Is it Labor on their way to a two-seat majority, or the plethora of 50-50s, can they fall the government's way? More in a sec here on Sky News Live. Thank you very much for watching. We are here in a very active conversation the night before Australia will decide whom its next government will be. We are here with Michael Kroger, with Stephen Conroy, with Sherry Markson and with Chris Kenny. And joining us now from Adelaide is the Leader of Australian Conservatives, Senator Cory Bernardi. Yet another example of why people have to take out that insurance policy in the Senate if it is to be a Labor victory, as polls would suggest a majority of 2. But again, that assumes all the 50-50s fall their way. That insurance policy is needed. And again, it sort of matters whether they can get the revenue stuff through, because this Senate has shown one thing time and time again, hasn't it, Cory, where they're never going to approve a revenue measure, but they'll approve all the spending measures, which means the budget's blown on day one.
Yeah,
It's a very good point, Paul. But you make another one about an insurance policy. It's become very trendy to say, oh, take out an insurance policy against bad government. The problem is most of the people saying it have been the most unreliable, inconsistent flip-floppers in the history of politics. And so for all of those that say that, when you come to it, you've got to examine their track record. And I don't mind saying that I've stuck to my guns in a whole range of areas. I'm for lower taxes for smaller government, a fairer deal for small business, a stronger families policy, and I just think we need a more civil society. Come hell or high water, we've fought the principled fight, we've done the right thing at every turn, and we're in the voters' hands tomorrow.
What is your sense? I mean, I said at the start of the show about 10 reasons why I'm not going to vote Labor. It's an opinion show. I'm allowed to give it and give it strongly as I do. You know, my concerns are multifaceted, but obviously the tax stuff we've talked about before. In your opinion, what are principled reasons not to vote Labor or not to vote Liberal in your case?
Well, I understand there's a lot of people who are very unhappy, but if you believe that government doesn't serve the people as well as it should, why do you want more of it? If you think that people who actually work and pay taxes deserve to keep more of their own money, why should they have their taxes put up? If you think that, you know, 40 or 50% of the people getting more in benefits than they contribute to the economy is not really healthy, then why would you be endorsing it? And I say often to people, do you feel government is treating you well? Do you think it's doing the right thing? Is the policy mix right? And they all go, no, it's not, it's wrong. And I say, well, why do you want more of it? Why is it that everyone in society today is saying, what's in it for me? Just give us me a little bit more and take it from someone else. I think that's entirely the wrong approach. And we've got to get back to having a balanced budget, government not encroaching in everyone's lives in every aspect of it, rebuild personal responsibility, make civil society better, strengthen the little platoons, the institutions that have done us so well, and return to some common sense.
All right, I've got 10 seconds. What's the website if people want to learn more?
Conservatives.org.au. Vote 1 above the line for the Australian Conservatives. We will look after your back and make sure the government doesn't ruin your life.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you for spending so much time with us. And sorry, lefties, he's sticking around for another 3 years as well. Strength to your arm, mate, and strength to the Australian Conservatives at this election. Now, I wanted to ask you all one final question about minor parties before we can sort of start to do a round. And I have no idea why the news poll's being delayed ever so slightly, but if I can bring it to you, we will. We have it in our hot little hands. We're just waiting for the thumbs up to tell you about it here. So I want to talk about that minor party preference discipline, because this is really what matters. Part of what gets Labor to its theoretical majority is the assumption that Palmer voters and One Nation voters and Australian Conservative voters are not as consistent in what they do with number 2 as the Greens voters are. What's your assumption about these people this time around, Chris? Do you believe there's any evidence to suggest that Palmer, with the advertising that he has put in place, is going to be able to deliver a more disciplined vote back to the coalition than the chaos vote that was there in 2013?
Yeah, I think there's evidence of that just by the fact that he's got to deal with the Liberals effectively. So I think there's every chance that they'll get a more reliable and larger share of Clive Palmer's preferences. This is the big unknown of this election. It's a double-edged sword, right? The big problem with the coalition side of politics over the past 3 or 4 years in terms of polling has been the fracturing of the Conservative vote, brought about largely by Tony Abbott being knifed by Malcolm Turnbull. That re-energised One Nation and got these minor parties on the right bleeding votes away, and they've never recovered from that. But this time, it's even bigger than the last election, because you've got Clive Palmer and Pauline Hanson. You're getting close to 10% of the vote, a lot of others in the mix as well. And pollsters, frankly, are guessing a lot of the time when it comes to where those preferences flow. If they get a larger and more reliable share of those preferences, it'll help them in many of these crucial marginals, especially in Queensland and New South Wales, and it could mean all the difference.
You know what? The common thought out there is that, you know, people are so disappointed with the coalition on climate change. But what the polling actually shows is, as you just said, the Conservative vote is what is left. And without giving away the result, there is one crucial line in the Australian's coverage of Newspoll tomorrow, and I'll read it without giving away the result. It says, the result is the lowest primary vote intention for the coalition recorded immediately before an election since Newspoll records began in 1987. And where that vote has gone is to One Nation and to Clive Palmer. But that is just so important. So, you know...
And you're right, it's primarily because, I would argue, and you're getting to, because of their weakness on climate change. They haven't been strong enough on the climate change issue.
Well, but also, but issues aside, as important as they are, in terms of just that, where have the numbers gone? I mean, Michael Kroger, this is what's worth talking about here, where the 2010 election hung Parliament. It was 37 and a bit to the Labor Party, 43 and a bit to the Liberal Party. Now, if the Liberal Party vote is somewhere around, 37...
42 and a bit, I think.
Yeah, 42 and a bit. It's pretty obvious what the mathematical difference in those few years has been, and it has been not Nick Xenophon, it has been the establishment of these two other parties. So I want to ask you, guesswork versus science, do you think that Palmer and Hanson voters will be more disciplined, given the nature of this election, than what they have been in the past? Because that's what everyone is betting, that they are somehow going to throw eventually back to Labor enough, so 50-50 falls their way.
Well, this is one of the major hopes for tomorrow. I preface the remarks by saying that the Roy Morgan gave us a poll the other night on Stephen and my show last Thursday week, which showed that the independent vote over the last 10 or 12 years has basically doubled from 12, 13 to 25, 26%. Now, that's largely, as you say correctly, on the right. The answer to your question is we don't know. Whereas on the left, the Greens traditionally give 79 to 83% of their preferences to Labor. And in a state seat here at the 14 election, when Labor came third, 88% of their preferences went to the Greens in the seat of Paran. So there is a manifestly powerful loyalty and discipline on the left. On the right, not so. Now, because the deal with Palmer has been well publicised, you're going to have a higher proportion percentage of Palmer preferences going to the coalition, but Palmer will not be handing out in the overwhelming majority of seats in Queensland. And the question then is, how do a lot of those voters know where to put their second preferences? And they'll usually put it back to the party they voted for traditionally. So you've got to hope that we get 65 to 70% of Palmer and One Nation. That puts us in the game. If it's mid-50s, that makes it very difficult indeed.
Stephen, let's again talk about the science and the guesswork here about this, because it's not an unreasonable question. It's not me sort of clutching at straws or searching for answers.
It's a very, very good question, Paul. And it is, as Michael said, it is the critical question. One of the reasons that this election is not a blowout for Labor and Bill Shorten is because of Clive Palmer and the impact of his advertising and Newspoll, and I don't think it was an incorrect assumption. So at the time, they openly, transparently declared it, and I think it was a reasonable thing to do, given the preference deal. Changed their assumption based on the 2013 election that the preferences for Palmer would flow the same way. So they were at 53 to 47% going to the Liberal Party and 47. And they switched that to 60-40, and that changed Newspoll from 52-48 to Labor to 51-49. I think that was a reasonable thing to do. I think that that Palmer vote and that more disciplined distribution, an increase of 7%, which you may say, well, that's not a lot, and Michael just made the point it needs to be 65, and I'll come back to that in a second. I think that has shown up in all of the polls. So I think that was the correct assessment to make, and that has really made this a closer and tighter election. I would have thought Bill was headed for 85 to 90 seats before the Palmer preference deal. Now, to back up your gut, Paul, and to Michael's point, what particularly in Queensland, the strongest areas for Palmer and Hanson, the intel I'm getting is that the Palmer and Hanson votes are more disciplined, because last time Palmer didn't campaign against Labor, he just campaigned for himself. Correct. This time round, Hanson and Palmer are saying don't vote for Bill Shorten. And what I'm hearing, particularly out of Queensland, is that preference flow is of the around 60%. And so the reason so many Queensland seats are so tight when they should have been in a normal political situation without the Palmer election advertising, 50 million plus, almost as much as the combined advertising of Labor and Liberal, is that it's taken votes away from Labor and it's funneled them back to the government. So Michael's right. I think if they got 65%, it would be a hung parliament. If they only get 60, based on those votes we've just seen, or that we're seeing last time and in the news poll over the last few weeks, you could see. But I would make the following point, because I'm not going to let this become a delegitimisation, which is what, frankly, I do think that statement that Shari read out is about, trying to delegitimise Bill's potential victory. We have a preferential voting system in this country. But the key here is that Labor has had a 3 or 4 point swing to it consistently in news poll for the last 3 years. That's an increase in Labor's vote. And we almost won the election of 34%. 37 and 38, which is where we've roughly been for 3 years, means that Labor should be able to get across the line.
Right, OK. Well, she didn't write it. She was simply reading something.
No, I said she was reading it out.
Right, OK.
She was reading about the coalition primary.
It's the
wasn't
lowest,
about Labor.
No, it's the lowest coalition primary heading into an election since 1987 when news poll records...
So a bagging of the coalition is somehow
But look, I think, we would all agree that Scott Morrison has had a remarkable campaign. This has been a one-man effort. He hasn't had a team behind him compared to Labor's united team. But, the other side of the coin is this is the most high-taxing radical agenda that anyone has taken to an election campaign since John Hewson in '93. That Bill Shorten is the most unpopular leader. Who knows since when? And yet, if the polls are right, he's about to win a minority government, if the polls are right. And so for the fact that the public are even considering this high-taxing radical agenda with an unpopular leader shows how disappointed they are in the coalition.
No, correct.
Yeah, that's part of it. There's a lot of factors at play, but I think it shows how dysfunctional our political debates become, and it also shows how fractured the Conservative side of politics has become. You'd think about 8 or 9% going to these minor parties. Even if 2/3 of that was back on the coalition primary, then it's game over. You're back to where you used to be, But that's their own doing, of course.
Well, but also it's this thing where, and can't stand when the media talks about itself, but the Channel 9 newspapers, one of their editorials in favour of a change of government was that it was we needed to end the leadership instability by voting for Labor, which in my view is ridiculous, because the very person who, unless he supported the change from Rudd to Gillard, unless he supported the process from Gillard to Rudd, would not have made this the 21st century phenomena that it is. Yes, Bob Hawke suffered it in 1991. But that's a whole political generation since. So I think it's disingenuous to argue that the person who starts the fire gets a gold medal for putting it out.
That was an absolute shocker of an editorial. Yeah, I mean, the whole editorial in the Herald was
start me on the media. The ABC tonight said Bill Shorten won the campaign. He's been on the defensive, an ever-diminishing figure throughout the campaign, and the polls have said he's been going backwards, yet the ABC and not answering the key questions about these costs.
I'm sorry.
And the ABC says he was...
The media regulators here, the media regulators...
That is not true.
Of course it's not. That's my point. It's not true.
Bill Shorten has gone forward in the polls this week to probably his highest in 3 years. For you to suggest that he's been going backwards...
Labor's vote, we haven't seen news poll yet, but Labor's vote has...
I'm pointing to Ipsos. I'm pointing to...
Ipsos is now...
I'm pointing to Essential. I'm pointing to all of the polls. I am pointing to all of the polls which have shown that Bill Shorten... So the narrative that Bill Shorten has had a terrible campaign is false.
Since the start of the campaign, it has tightened.
His polling has gone up, and it particularly took a jump after the Daily Telegraph ran an outrageous story. Okay?
But I tell you what, I actually agree with you. Not that it was outrageous, of course. I agree with you that he went up, but that's because it was the first time we actually saw him speak with some sincerity, because he was speaking about his mum with passion.
Well,
that's why it went
Daily
up.
Telegraph is our secret weapon. We appreciate that.
You can't talk about a campaign where the polls have tightened throughout and point to one poll where he might have blipped up 1% and say that he's had a great campaign.
All right, Michael Kroger, change the subject for me, please.
Yeah. Can we get to, before we get to news poll, the Australians published another absolutely fascinating article, and I must say, where would we be without the Australian newspaper, for Christ's sake, in this country? I mean...
Would be quoting Ipsos.
Well, yeah.
which is general is not worth quoting.
Shocking editorial, Channel 9 shocking editorial.
The Australian bags us from time to time. It bags Labor, but you know it's a fearless newspaper, unlike some newspapers and television stations who only produce one version of events.
Correct.
Can I just report on this very interesting statistics about postal votes, which the Australians reported on, apart from the headline which says the postal votes favour Labor, which the sub-editor will need to be shot because it says it completely the opposite. Now, postal votes are those that are lodged basically by the political party on behalf of voters. So if a political party has lodged a postal vote, it basically means those people are voting for your candidate. In the seat of Deakin, a seat Labor needs to win, the Liberals have lodged 6,094 votes. Labor have lodged 1,990. In two other critical seats, here are the postal votes. In Dickson, Peter Dutton's seat, which shows you how well the Liberal Party branch members are doing and candidates are doing in organising postal votes. In Peter Dutton's seat, Labor have lodged 752 postal votes. Peter Dutton's team have lodged 5,192. And in Christian Porter's seat in Pearce, where Labor are hoping to win, Labor have lodged 71 postal votes and Christian Porter's team have lodged 3,487. And in Stirling, a safer Liberal seat, Labor have lodged 260 and we've lodged 3,586. So this is repeated.
What a fascinating
this is repeated all
piece
the way.
Of fake news.
It's not
in the
fake
way
news
you
at all.
have just described it.
It is showing.
You've actually just showed you're winning the seats you hold, and you've ignored the fact you're losing the postal votes in two seats you hold in Victoria, where you're in the biggest trouble. So let's pick a. Why didn't you tell us about how you were going in, Kooyong? Like seriously, Michael. What this
I'll tell you about Kooyong.
Shows.
Since you want to know about Kooyong,
yeah, exactly.
Josh Frydenberg has lodged 6,493.
In a safe Liberal seat, the Liberals have lodged more votes.
Yeah.
In the two seats that matter that can change the government, which Michael actually has ignored in his fake news spiel,
so
they have lost.
Oh, God. Let's go
Chisholm.
to that. OK. Let's go to those two, Stephen.
The two seats that might actually change the government.
Well, Corangamite's notionally Labor. In Corangamite, Labor have lodged 3,435. We've lodged 3,377.
And
so
Chisholm?
yes,
And Chisholm?
you've lodged 65, 88 more in that one seat. And in Chisholm, we've lodged you've lodged a lot more than us, 3,632.
So I repeat.
To us, 950. But you picked two seats.
No, I picked the two
others.
seats that might change the government.
There's 14 other seats where you've been slaughtered.
Two seats where you might
Peter
change
Dutton's seat,
the
you've been
government.
slaughtered. In Deakin, you've been slaughtered. In Goldstein, you've been slaughtered. Lindsay, Wentworth, Indi, Herbert, Cowper, Farrer, Gilmore, Reid, Robertson, Warringah, Latrobe, Casey, Higgins, Flinders, Flynn, Petrie, Dixon, Hasluck, Pearce, Stirling, Dunkley, Swan, Braddon and Bass.
You've been
Victoria, in all of those seats in the pre-polls.
In Victoria, where you can change the government with, Labor's ahead.
One's a draw. One's a draw. And you're in front of one other.
And we would
me.
have got smashed.
But hang on, what about Lindsay?
Go and check.
What about Indi?
Go and
What about
check.
Lindsay? What about Indi? What about the seats that are just... I know what you're saying, Stephen. I accept it.
You're
Hang
miles
on, you
behind
don't
in
care.
Indi is not going to change the government.
Paul.
You may as well ask about the safest Liberal Party or the safest National
What about
Party.
Lindsay?
Say
What about Lindsay?
They're winning.
That's a Labor seat.
They're winning.
Mate, if you win 2 seats, you're not going to win government. If you win 2 seats, mate, you're a goner. Because you're going to lose 5.
Isn't the point about pre-poll that it's people who know how they're going to vote? It doesn't necessarily mean that they're supporting Labor. It's people who have made up their minds and they go to the postal.
That's the pre-poll. The postal is logged in by the...
postals. Yes. So what you have to do is add the other fact that matters to this, and Michael's better than this. The other fact is where the swings are on, and you add in the postal vote performance as described. That's when they change the government
It's about
of the country.
It's 18. You don't want to know. You want to know, Paul, why Stephen was such a successful minister? He's 18 to 1 outpolled, right? He's in front in postal vote in Chisholm by 1,000. He's behind in 18 others, and he's claiming that as a victory.
Seriously.
This is just fantastic.
Seriously.
It reminds me of a great story I heard about one of our Liberal premiers many years ago. He went around the cabinet table, purportedly, and took the views of all his cabinet colleagues. 19 of them were against him. And he said, well, you 19 don't matter, I'm the Premier, so we're doing what I want. This is his thing. He's down 18 to 1 and he thinks he's in front. Goodness me.
Stephen, if you do get that job in Paris,
win the election.
I still want to come and stay with you.
On Michael's analysis, they've won the election. It's all over. Don't turn up tomorrow.
On that analysis,
Put your house on it. Put your house, you've won the election.
Analysis, you've won 1 seat. You'll win. On that analysis, you'd win Chisholm. And that'll give you 70.
Ignoring what is the effective swing on it based on the last postal vote performance that represents, Michael. You and I know we got smashed in postals 3 years ago. That represents, just for the aficionados, a swing to Labor on the postals, which way it matters.
I love this. I could watch it all night. I love
the Liberal Party's on the ground campaign.
There's no gloves,
Our branch
there's
members
no
have done a
skin.
great job across the country.
Got any numbers on the Eurovision Song Contest?
There's no knuckles left.
Are we ever going to get news poll?
No, well, here's the thing.
Are we ever going to get news poll?
Dragging their feet at news.
But what about
at the Australian? We've been texting them frantically, and we can't do it till they drop it.
I tell you why.
They're not going to drop it for a while.
Here it is.
You can't.
But
I can if they
you
keep this
cannot.
up.
No, you cannot.
I'm prepared to announce it if they keep this up.
Why don't we talk about the circumstance around the news
I didn't
polls?
get
So
it
how
from
many
you.
calls were done before and after news of Bob Hawke's passing broke? That we can talk about.
Oh, my goodness.
So there
So hang on, everyone all day's been saying, "Oh, yeah,
Has
do
this
it
had
for
an
Bob."
impact?
So,
Yeah, but this is someone's got to call that out, right? Do you believe this stuff that Bob Hawke?
Well, instead of what I believe, I was going to talk to you about what the figures show.
doesn't matter.
So there were, with Newspoll, there were 3,000 calls made, and 2,000 of them were after news of Bob Hawke's passing broke. I'm also told, and Michael Kroger, I'm sure you will be able to correct me on this if I've got it wrong, although I don't think I have. I'm told that the overnight tracking last night for the coalition was the best of the entire week, the overnight tracking, and that half of that was done after news of Bob Hawke's passing broke as well.
Demonstrating that for those of us who've actually studied the tracking, received it at 6 o'clock in the morning, it continues to be a waste of money. And that's for both parties, let me tell you.
Oh, Stephen, we're allowed to get the giggles in now, mate. We're allowed to get the giggles in now because if the bookies and the media are right, you'll have plenty tomorrow. But it's a fascinating picture of where we go. I wish I could do a news poll. Alas, I can't until the bosses say it's all right, even though it's in my hot little hand and all of these people want to break the rules for me.
Oh, it's there. It's up. It's up.
God.
It's just come
All right, everybody. News poll.
Should we hold it? Do you want to hold it up?
All right, the front page of the Australian newspaper tomorrow is that the voters bob each way, and news poll is 51.5 to 48.5. The primary vote for the coalition is at 38%. The primary vote for the Labor Party is at 37%. Better Prime Minister, which clearly doesn't matter at this moment, is 47 to 38. I also understand a deeper reading of the numbers as well, is that the Palmer United Party is at 4% nationally, and Pauline Hanson is at 3%. The Greens at 9%, I understand it to be. But essentially, as we've talked about all the way through, I think the most fascinating area of discussion is the discipline of the people who are going to vote Palmer or One Nation. If they are going to throw their vote back to the Libs, this thing is absolute game on. They haven't in the past, but the campaigns have been different in the past. We'll see what happens from here. A quick headline thought on everyone, and then we are so over time, so I'll start with you first, Stephen Conroy. What do you think of the news poll? And let's get to the specifics. What does 37 primary mean when that number is the same number that took us to a hung parliament in 2010?
I think what that says is that when we were talking earlier, I was basing it on the 51-49 of news poll saying, you know, at least 78. I would probably say that would give me enough confidence to say Labor will probably have an 8 in front of it. And depending on, again, and this point you're making is absolutely critical, what happens to Palmer and Hanson's preferences, particularly in Queensland seats. If they break the same as the last election, Labor could win 4 or 5. If they're more consistent with the sort of 60-40 view that has been used, and I'm not critical of that at all, then it will be probably 80, 81, maybe 82 at best.
Okay, Michael Kroger, 51.5, 48.5, 38 primary for Coalition, 37 for Labor.
Very hard for the Coalition to win an election on a 38% primary vote. I'm not sure that's ever happened before, except that in this election, you've got to hope, as I said earlier, that the Palmer and One Nation percentage split rises to historic highs, which would then bump us above 48.5, and therefore you hope that news poll has underestimated the split of those preferences. But certainly on 38% alone, that's not enough to win the election. But if you look at individual seats, you know, you've got to hope that the Labor vote is highest in its safe seats, and they're not doing so well in the marginals. And thirdly, you've got to hope that there's a shy Trump voter effect, which means that a lot of people aren't telling the pollsters that they are going to vote against Bill Shorten because they don't want all these high taxes and the chaos that will ensue when he gets his big spending promises and his tax increases knocked back by the Senate, and the massive effect that's then going to have on the budget going forward. So if those three strings are at play, Scott Morrison can win tomorrow. He's certainly run a great campaign, and I think everyone in the Liberal Party is delighted that you know, he's come through this election in the way in which he has. He's been absolutely superb, as is his deputy, Josh Frydenberg. Stephen,
Michael, thank you very much. You can continue the fight in the car park,
Thanks,
but
mate.
Don't go too hard because you'll be on the telly tomorrow night. Thank you very much for your good spirits, good natures and your big brains. And final two thoughts here on that news poll. Sherry Markson?
Very quickly, obviously it indicates a Labor win, potentially 81 seats, but most likely minority government. But I think it is too close to predict because it does come down to those handful of marginal seats we've been speaking about, and there's an undecided vote of between 20 and 30% in each seat.
Chris, I still say this numbers, the analysis and the hour of television we've just had, we've explained why this is still in the air.
Yeah, but a primary vote at 38 is not going to do it for the Coalition. They would have killed for the... It's only, you're talking 1 point movement in the polls, so with margin of error, you know, who knows? They would, at 1 point the other way, take them to 40. With all those minor parties, you give them a really good running. Now, what you're counting on now for the Coalition is the shy Tory effect, or the shy Trump effect that Michael was talking about. And usually the Coalition does actually poll in the election primary vote slightly better than what the polling shows because of that effect. People don't share their coalition voting preferences, but they can't win on a primary of 38 in my view, but I think they can win on a primary of 40, which is a lot lower than used to be the case.
Thank you very much, guys. What a wild night. All right, all the best. Congratulations on your coverage all the way through. Looking forward to seeing you on the telly here on the Friday, and we're looking forward to seeing you as part of it all tomorrow, mate.
Tomorrow night, mate. See you then.
Here we go. All right, geez, we went an entire 90 minutes without endless conversation about Tony Abbott. So we'll move on to that and a whole lot of other seats that matter in the next little while. That was fun. Plenty more to come here on Paul Murray Live. Don't go anywhere.
Now, back live with Paul Murray.
Thank you very much for watching. It is the night before the federal election. Let's keep it going now with some powerhouse To end us off on what has been a very long campaign, Janine Perrott, fired up, ready to go. Thank you very much for being here.
Oh, wouldn't miss it. You know us. How many elections have we done?
Bloody oath, we have done. We've done
a
plenty.
lot.
We've double-acted for a long time, my friends.
Spills, you name it.
It's all been there, you know. and Gary Hardgrave, this would be normally the time you'd see him on the telly, so let's get him there as the former Howard Government Minister. Dear friend of us all, apologies for borrowing your time tonight, but I appreciate it, mate. How are you feeling with that news poll, 51.5, 48.5 and all of that stuff we were talking about if Palmer and if One Nation, but that's a lot of ifs and buts.
Yeah, of course, there's always a lot of ifs and buts. And Paul, I heard that comment before, that 20 to 30% of people going into the polling booth are undecided. Well, that's pretty standard. That's exactly what happens. So it's going to be down to the ground game on the day. Mind you, a lot of people have been enormously scared by this campaign, have voted early. They wanted to keep away from the rabble-rousing. And some of the stuff I'm hearing out of Warringah, and I talk about putting the war into Warringah, it's getting ugly there by some of the allegations. And look, it is not going to be pleasant on the polling booths in a lot of these marginal seats tomorrow. That is scaring a lot of people. You want to talk about shy Tories, mate, there is a lot of bladders right now that are really worried about tomorrow. A lot of people very scared by the outcome. And, Paul, this is the problem. This is the problem. Scott Morrison's not scaring anyone. Bill Shorten's frightening the Shortens out of them. It's real simple.
Now, let's talk about that aggro, though, Janine, where, look, there is we told you a bit earlier that Sky News can confirm the police did attend a school that is about to become a polling booth with an allegation that somebody had been stabbed in an altercation. It's not known whom the victim was, who the assailant was, and whether or not it is related to the preparations of something becoming a polling booth. I know that there are all sorts of stuff that is being screamed about on social media about confrontations here and confrontations there. Look, aggro is always through the roof the night before because, let's be honest, it is the most invested, the diest of diehards that are literally on the way to midnight going to be the ones who are waiting until it's time to put the bunting up. We're not allowed to do it until this o'clock, that o'clock, and passions go through the roof. But I think we can all fairly agree that if a stabbing is getting involved...
That's getting ridiculous.
Calm the F down.
Well, I've seen a little bit of that video and you don't see any stabbing. It just looks like, you know, absolutely pathetic. And the one thing I want to say is, I hate the term un-Australian, but it really makes me depressed when I see this. I mean, we might argue, we might get fired up on the telly and people might even have a bit of a shout or a snipe at someone at the polling booth. But this kind of physical altercation is something you kind of don't expect and don't want to see here. Look, the ripping down of posters, the disappearing cornflutes, well, that's been going on forever and there's been allegations here. I think what happened here was that somebody was actually caught red-handed ripping down the posters and that's where tensions went. But look, to what Gary said about tensions tomorrow, I've never seen an altercation. You've obviously run, Gary. I would hope you get, as I said, a bit of sniping, a bit of carry on, but nothing more than that.
Well, look, I've seen it, Paul. I've seen it get ugly on occasions, but this is the ugliest I've ever seen. And I reckon the point I always used to make to my polling booth workers was we live local and you should conduct yourself in a way that anybody who sees you on polling day is not going to be pulling you up at the shopping centre in a week or two's time. In other words, own your conduct. Now, I think a lot of problems you're seeing in a place like Warringah are a whole lot of blow-ins who aren't locals, who are in fact there urging on a campaign that's full of hatred and putrid hatred at that towards the great Tony Abbott. I think that's the problem. There's nobody taking ownership of their conduct, Paul.
Also, the other problem is that now we have social media. So what was going on in the middle of the night and a bit of pushing and shoving maybe, we wouldn't have seen before. But as you say, if you want to misbehave on a polling booth, if you want people to conduct themselves well, and we see this on Twitter every election now, people are running every slight. It's all going to be up there. So it's even more important how you conduct yourself.
Well, so let us talk about Warringah. We've put this conversation off for a while because obviously looking at the national contest, let's start to get into, look, who knows? I mean, who knows is the only way of saying it because all of the data is 50-50, bees this, bees that. The betting markets moved pretty dramatically today in reaction to media reporting and Twitter outrage about the Bob Hawke statement. I think all of that's a little overblown and over the top here. Look, I'm not going to ask you guys to predict because, I'm not going to be foolish enough to do that to you. But what is your sense about how close this thing is. Is this one of those ones where your expectation is that this is one of the last things to be resolved, or is going to be relatively middle of the road tomorrow night?
Look, initially I always thought Tony Abbott would get across the line in the end. I mean, there's a lot of publicity, a lot of excitement, but at the end he's an old warhorse, he's a seasoned campaigner. Look, I do agree with you. I think when I saw last night's tweet, I thought, oh my God, Twitter will go into meltdown and outrage, and I think it was overblown. However, really bad judgment on his part. I mean, I keep quoting David Campbell, the entertainer, just had one line, which I think was perfect. He said, "Read the room, mate." And that's what Tony Abbott missed. You're in the fight of your life, you're just there. It was unnecessary. If he can't see what that was going to do, I'm not surprised the betting markets went, I don't know, it should be enough to get him over, to make him lose the seat.
Agree.
But it reminds everyone of exactly what they're complaining about it.
Gary, I got a hard break here, but give me a response to that moment and how it's being interpreted and how you think it'll land.
Well, look, I think this Steggall woman, I mean, one Steggall went down tonight. East lost against the Broncos, so that's one down, one to go tomorrow is my reading of it. And Graham Richardson is right. I agree with Richo. This woman doesn't stand for anything, and she has imported a lot of people who are bad people, it seems to my mind, and, caused bad people to come into an area that doesn't deserve that sort of nonsense. So you can't honestly vote for this bad behaviour. Tony Abbott wants to work for Australia and work for Warringah first and foremost. Put him back to work, get him back to work on Monday.
All right, quick break, back with some more election insights the night before Australia decides. Don't forget, full coverage all day and the best coverage, the best place to watch the numbers, the best place to get the opinion, the best place for the hot takes. Put Twitter down, keep watching Sky News.
Invest with La Trobe Financial, Australia's multi-award-winning wealth manager, returning 5.2% on a 12-month investment. Make your money work harder for you. Call 138010.
This is food freedom. The freedom to order the same thing every Saturday night. To change your dinner plans. I'm vegan. To be too busy to cook. Order what you want, where you want, when you want. Deliveroo. Food freedom.
Our perfect moment is when you have yours. Sail with Australia's best cruise line. Call your travel agent or book at princess.com. Princess Cruises. Come back new.
We're gonna do this, you and me. Jimmy, talk about the fact that your childhood bed is a Pikachu bed.
Coincidence. I've never been so flattered and creeped out at the same time.
Everyday exposure to digital screens can strain your eyes. Thompson's One-A-Day Bilberry is a high-potency herbal supplement. It helps support and maintain healthy eye function naturally. Thompson's One-A-Day Bilberry, the natural advantage.
Who are the real winners in the federal election? You are, because this week, if you subscribe to The Spectator Australia, you get 10 issues for just $10. Go to spectator.com.au. It doesn't matter who loses, you win.
Get the luxury look for less with 30% off your second light or fan from Beacon's inspiring new winter collection. These on-trend designs instantly update any home on any budget. 30% off your second light or fan now.
At Prosper, we help small businesses fund what's next.
Like a loan to hire more of me.
Like cash to pay these invoices. Hi.
With funds for paying you, maybe not you.
What I want next? To expand my business.
To fix that rattle. To go from making a big deal to being a big deal.
At Prosper, we help small businesses fund what's next, with funding possible in 24 hours.
Managing your health cover shouldn't interrupt your life. That's why, with the NIB app, you can manage your policy on the go, check your remaining limits, and simply snap to make a claim. Huh, not bad. Yes. And if you need to, you can call the team awarded Australia's Best Contact Centre. That's how it should be. That's NIB.
So you found your ideal hotel and you're ready to book. But then there are so many deals. They can get really confusing. With Trivago, you can easily compare the prices of different rooms across multiple websites. See? Nice and easy. Hotel Trivago.
Built to take on the harshest off-road conditions. Tough, resilient, indestructible. Tatra Trucks, exclusive to Off-Road Trucks Australia.
Struggling with all-day energy? Maybe you're low on vitamin B. Nature's Own Super B Complex is packed with all the B vitamins that support energy production and help your body convert food to energy for sustained energy throughout the day. Be energy smart with Nature's Own Super B Complex and be body smart with Nature's Own.
Now, back live with Paul Murray.
Thank you very much for watching. Here with our two great mates, Gary Hardgrave and Janine Perrott. Now, Janine, Gary's in Brisbane and he may be able to just settle your heart because you are nervous, anxious.
No, I'm not. I have great belief in the Australian people. I don't care.
Might get in the
I don't care who else they vote for. As I keep saying to Queenslanders, I don't care. What else you do, put Palmer last. I am hoping, you know how they were talking about in the last hour, the shy Conservative, that they're too embarrassed to admit it. Well, then how does that work with Clive Palmer? You would think people would be too embarrassed to admit in the polling that they're going for Palmer. So does that mean there's a shy Palmer vote or that they're just having a lend of us?
Or that the polling is the tip of the Titanic iceberg?
No, I won't. Gary, put me out of my misery. I won't be able to sleep tonight.
What do you think is going to happen with Palmer in the Senate in Queensland?
Oh, well, he'll get a pretty big vote, but I don't know whether he'll get what he would hope to get for his money. But I reckon he's going to help get both Malcolm Roberts and the number 3 on the LNP Senate ticket elected. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was a 4-2 split in the Senate tomorrow, but we'll see. You know, anything can happen, Paul. The Senate is a mystery, and a little bit here and a little bit there can make all sorts of differences. But look, the scary part about it for a lot of people is that they're feeling bullied and pushed and shoved. Tomorrow they're going to get bullied and pushed and shoved, and there's only one side of politics that's doing the bullying and the pushing and the shoving. And there are a lot of very scared people tonight, people who are
bullying and
almost
pushing and shoving? Sorry, who's doing the physical bullying?
Oh, come on, Janine, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I'm not, that's what I'm asking.
The activists, the get-ups and the Greens and the Labor Party people.
I mean,
you know, Janine, if you are wanting to run the country, you've got to bring people together. You know, we had a lot of and correct assessments of the great Bob Hawke. I mean, Bob Hawke died just over a day ago. He was a guy who brought people together. He had the left and the right admiring him. Even people who didn't vote for him still admired him. They didn't feel threatened by him. But I don't think you can say that about Bill Shorten. He's certainly no Bob Hawke, and Bill Shorten hasn't brought people together the way in which you want a Prime Minister to do. And that is the problem, that a lot of people are going to pass judgment on tomorrow. I remember the 83 campaign.
Can we just, I mean, St Bob, I know it's early days, but I worked for News Limited. I worked for The Australian then, and I remember it wasn't, oh, goody, the head of the ACTU's coming in. The business and a lot of the media ran a very, very concerned campaign. There was a lot of real concern about Bob Hawke. Yes, he won in a very big landslide, but that was not the impression before. Business said this was it. He's going to destroy us. Their platform was not that inclusive, wonderful economic reform. If you look at the 83 platform, which they obviously ditched, they look a lot better in hindsight. So as far as what people ended up like, and we look back at them, there was certainly that feeling about Hawke before he got in too. I'm not saying Bill Shorten is certainly no Bob Hawke, but the scare campaign before someone's in, if the best you can say is he might be really bad, but we don't know.
What's the Hawkey factor here, Gary?
I don't agree. I was reporting on the 83 campaign too, and I had Paul Keating and Bob Hawke come into our office at Channel 7, State Affair, when we used to produce local current affairs shows here in Brisbane, and it was really quite evident to me that Bob Hawke snuck up on Bill Hayden, and I was at that media conference that day when that all occurred, when the Labor Federal Caucus decided to knife Bill Hayden, and Hawke took over, and Hawke was talking about the way in which he was going to bring a wages accord, was going to bring people together, was going to get business to sit down and workers to sit down. We're not hearing any language like that out of Shorten.
Bill Shorten said he's going to have a summit. He's going to have a summit.
Oh, yeah, right. Oh, yes,
he's going to have a Hawkeye summit. He's not going to call it an accord. It's a summit, Gary. We're calling it a summit.
Okay, a summit, yes.
Oh, OK, rightio, fine. OK, I've got a block of flats for you in Tasmania to buy as well.
Now, there's also, again, these little campaign tactics. We're not pretending that this is the headline news. It's just I want to give you the whole picture of the crazy stuff that happens around the country. Apparently there's a get-up plan tomorrow. I hope this isn't true, but apparently there's a get-up plan tomorrow that they are going to be deploying in Warringah again. Potentially, they are going to be having school kids there. School kids in the approach to the voting booths, vote for my future, climate change, etc., etc. Can I just say, I hope that is 100% fake news, and I hope that nobody is deploying kids at polling booths. Let's hope that's utter bullshit.
I don't get worried about things that haven't happened yet. If it's, there's a lot of things going around. And if they did, I know your views on using children in these things. It's appalling.
Yeah. Well, as I said, look, here's the thing.
I love that story that Greta Thunberg was using the data out of the Ice Age 2 movie, which your kids would enjoy, Paul. Apparently, that's the basis of her concern about climate change, is Ice Age 2. I mean, seriously, you've got to keep the kids out of it. Let kids be kids. Let the grown-ups act like responsible grown-ups on polling booths tomorrow. Look like you actually care about the community you're trying to serve, not beat it up.
By the way, shout out to my mate Andrew, who's watching, who's reliably informed me quite correctly that in 1983, the host of this program was in preschool.
I didn't want to bring that up. Gary and I don't want to stress how very young you are. We're still youthful.
Literally, God love you. You know Dorso.
I do know Dorso.
God love you,
Was
mate.
he at preschool with you?
Yeah. Thanks for keeping me up this late, young man.
Yeah, sorry. I'll turn the noise down. Now,
I'm always here. What am I saying?
Now, I want to take a break here. Obviously, Gary, look, I think Peter Dutton's going to be fine in Dixon. I think that Get Up had misfired for a whole collection of different reasons, and I love that the Labor Party was kind of having a bet each way here. The spin was, things are getting really close, at the same time as we know what was happening on the ground, which was that people who were doing the booth working were actually moving across to the seat of Longman to try to play sandbag there.
That's right.
So are you willing to put them on the line for Peter Dutton in Dixon?
Oh, look, I think it's going to be very, very close for Peter Dutton tomorrow, and every vote will be important. Paul, Labor hid Bill Shorten 2 weeks ago. He disappeared off the polling booths. So will Bill Shorten be back tomorrow? Is Labor really confident about their leader? He's not bringing anything to the table, and that's the problem. So Peter Dutton, it'll be a close-run thing, but I'm optimistic that his service will continue. We'll see.
Can I say, if Scott Morrison wants to have a miracle and get back, it might be a good thing if Mr Dutton and Mr Abbott both lost their seats as well. It would give him a much clearer path forward and not bring up bad memories. We could move forward, as they say, into a new era of the Libs under a Morrison government.
I'm more than happy for a future Morrison government to have no Pine, no O'Dwyer, no Bishop.
Hang on, well,
I'm happy for that, sweet mate. I'll take Abbott and Dutton any day, any day.
I've got it on a list.
Yeah, correct. All right, let's take a quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live.
Now, back live with Paul Murray.
Thank you very much for watching, wherever you happen to be. We are here, of course, with the host normally at this time on a Friday night, Gary Hardgrave, former Howard Government Minister and the in-house fact-checker on Paul Murray Live. She keeps me on my toes, Janine Barrett. She was evaluating my 10 reasons why not to vote Labor from the start of the show. I don't believe anyone.
Can I tell you something? Here's an interesting one, an
How did you whittle it
observation.
down to just 10?
Something different
seriously.
nobody's focused on today. The stock market was up slightly today, which had very little reason to do it. No, but in the old days, Gary would remember, markets on the thought of a Labor, even a chance of it, they'd move, they're there. I rang brokers. It's like, yeah.
Either way, we'll be
even though, I mean, they obviously don't want
all
Labor,
these
they
people
see a lot
selling
of
their
problems.
assets off. It's, you know, a lot of money being made today as people are selling,
When people talk
selling
about the
because they're
betting
fearing
markets, you would
shortens
think
coming.
the stock market, I thought they might have had a little bit of a jitter, given the economic, some of those things, and these are going to hit the people who invest in the stock market.
Well, actually, you bring me to this, right?
There's nothing flippant about... There's nothing flippant about tomorrow, though. There is nothing flippant about tomorrow. Forget the markets today. Tomorrow is the end of days for a lot of Australians.
Oh, yes,
a lot of people are genuinely fearful. No, Kerry Ann was spot on. You know, she's a girl from Sandgate here in Brisbane. She knows what she's talking about. She's a real person. Kerry Ann was right. It is end of days stuff. And you can laugh, but there are a lot of older Australians who are feeling very, very vulnerable right now tonight. A lot of people on the land feeling very, very vulnerable. There's a lot of people in our suburban areas feeling very, very vulnerable.
They are. First world country that even Bill Shorten can't destroy in the short time.
How can we afford these taxes?
Thanks to Queensland, we're going to have those senators. They're not going to let
anyone... How can you put hundreds of millions of dollars worth of extra taxes on everyday Australian? How can you put hundreds of millions of dollars worth of extra taxes? How can the everyday Australian afford that? Everything is going up. Everything is going up except our wages. That's what's going to happen.
Well, I wanted to ask you both about...
things are going down.
A theme that we've bounced around a little bit tonight, which is, again, if there is a shortened victory, as the polls would suggest, again, if you just joined us, news poll, the last news poll that'll be there for Election Day, front page of the Australian newspaper, 51.5 to 48.5. Now, there's the ifs and buts and all the rest of it is that it's all based off the idea that the people voting for Palmer, voting for One Nation will eventually somehow go back to Labor. It's an opinion show. My opinion is you shouldn't do that, but your vote, that's the joy of the free country that we live in. But I wanted to talk about the Senate and the makeup of the Senate because this is what matters about whether there is 2 One Nation senators at least that'll be there, whether Palmer's there or not, based off what he said publicly. We know that the makeup of the Senate is that even the best case scenario being spun by the left is that they're going to be 2, 3, 4 votes short of being able to get anything done. Now, obviously, there are more senators, like, you know, potentially the best case scenario is if you can have a centre alliance, if you can have a hinch, you'll be able to get there, maybe sort of bevel some edges off if there's a random independent somewhere, a Jackie Lambie, etc., etc. But this is a big thing worth talking about, which is that for the entire picture that Shorten is painting to work, he's got to be able to pay for it. The Senate has relentlessly shown us that they will not, they'll pass spending, but they won't pass revenue and they won't pass spending cuts, which means if that doesn't happen, it's multiple billion dollars in the hole from day one.
Well, only if you still spend it. This could be the best thing that happened to him. You have to pare back things. Firstly, the ridiculous idea of the government paying for childcare workers. We can move that one back to another way. But you've got to cut back. It's a great excuse for them to cut back.
Knowingly lying.
Not knowingly lying.
Telling
if the Senate comes out, that's not his fault. No, that's not true.
But is it? But
come off it.
But Gary, what about that? But what about that scenario there, where if that is the picture that we face on Monday, by the time that we reconvene and start talking again, obviously Sunday night as well. That's a huge issue because obviously Labor want to rack up as many early wins as possible. Strategically, they robbed the Abbott government of the earliest and most obvious win of the reduction of the carbon tax until the following July. And that means the wins they can get through the Senate is spending, not the taxes, which means they'll put the tax fight off until after they've committed to the spending.
Yeah, look, the back the horse of self-interest every time. These various senators, though, we don't know who they are, Paul, and the Senate will be more likely to be supportive of the Morrison agenda based on if the things that the lucky pathway people are saying is possible, but it's hard to see. If that occurs tomorrow, then we're likely to see a Senate that is actually going to horse trade on some issues, but actually progress smaller government, progress less taxation, progress a greater sense of trust. But there's no guarantee under the Shorten thing unless the Greens back him, and the Greens have got a far more radical agenda. I mean, Paul, this is the trouble. The Greens get up in various states around Australia tomorrow. The Greens are the ones that are going to be shaping that legislation. That's the problem.
I agree. That's
every time.
The biggest of all the reasons not to do it. I don't want the Greens a heartbeat away from anything. Thank you very much, Janine. Thank you very much, Gary. That's our show. Thank you very much for watching. Stand by for the front page and the analysis of what's in the paper tomorrow. But choose. Nothing's inevitable. You get to vote.